All right. Book 6, The Kingdom of the Dead. Um, Sort of leaving off from where we were last time. Um, we had Palinurus cast into the sea. He's actually attacked by the god of sleep and thrown overboard. His naked corpse will lie on an unknown shore. This comes back up in this chapter, so it's important. And there's also a historical reference there. It's worth looking up if you want to take the time to go look up that particular quote, similar to the one earlier in the book, um, about a headless corpse lying unnamed on a foreign shore. That being this historical context. That's sort of where we pick up off here. We won't dwell on it for a long time because we got a lot to get through here, but worth going and looking up sort of the historical context of why Virgil added that particular line in there with Palinurus at the end of book 5.
That real quick at the risk, I don't want to sidetrack this whole thing completely. So cut me off, or yeah. But this seems like one of those things that, were Paul to address it, he'd be using to, like, even the pagans get this. You guys, like, what are you doing? Um, Clearly, these guys place a massive emphasis on, um, you know, physical burial and dealing well with the dead. And now we live in just such a trash world, consumerist culture that, like, well, yeah, why would I not make it as easy as possible and take my loved ones and, package them into ashes that are this big and then dispose of them wherever I can. Um, just one more element of just rage inciting consumerist slop. I don't really have anywhere else productive to take that, but seemed like something to say.
If you haven't ever explored that topic from a theological standpoint, I would encourage you to do so. If we believe as Christians that our bodies will be resurrected one day and glorified in the resurrection, not something I would recommend planning on. Cremation is something that I don't believe is a Christian practice at all. I'm not like trying to indict anyone there if they haven't thought about it, and then that's something that's in their history or past or whatever, but something that is worth giving some theological thought to, which just goes back to the fact that literally everything matters.
Yeah, and
there's not something in this life that's just like, frivolous or trivial.
Yeah, that's one of those things that, like, I'm so grateful I heard in passing, because, like, it's like I spend zero time thinking about things typically that aren't relevant in my own life until they are relevant. And you have some things that, like, all right, whatever. But there are things that are like a big deal. And then if it, like, all of a sudden, like, oh no, this is very important. Like, you're like, I don't know. Do you have the framework to make the right decision? Like, just like, if you don't have a track record of building toughness and grit, and then you're put in a situation that requires a lot of it, you're very likely to just fold like a cheap lawn chair. So like, if you don't, and, like, so that was never a thing that was on my mind until it was a very pressing thing on my mind. And I'm super grateful that I had heard that in passing, to the point where I was like, oh, like, I should figure this out. So, just, and that's another one of those things, like, now, not nearly as often, but, like, whenever it comes up, I work into conversations, because I'm like, that's important. And, like, you should have a decision, and, like, you should have thought that through before you have to think that through.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, proactive is better than reactive in essentially every single case. So the more proactive you can see it be, it relates to the same thing that we discussed a few books back about how jarring it was for Aeneas to lose his father, and the fact that you could tell, like, he wasn't ready for that. Not that you can be ready for that, but there's a certain amount of proactive thought and intention that you can give to things so that you at least have a framework to work off of when disaster falls. Yeah. So extremely important, very similar principle to apply in that particular case. So Kingdom of the Dead, book 6. They show up at Cumae's beaches, and they swing in, and this is the first time that they step foot on Hesperian land. So they are getting closer to their goal here. At this point, what he's actually doing is he's going to find the Temple of Apollo in order to descend into the underworld and meet his father. That's the entire point of this voyage. That's why they are where they are. And you can see him ascend and reach this mountaintop in order to go into this temple. Basically, there you have a seer, and then you also have a sibyl who basically the seer speaks through a virgin that is there in the temple, and he's supposed to go there and basically get the doors of death to open so that he might go into the underworld and meet with his father, which is happening because Anchises, Aeneas's father, commands his shade sent by Jove, tells him to do this in the previous book. And so that's why he is where he is. That's why he's doing what he's doing. He's once again on task, on mission. And once again, we see that it's actually Anchises, his father, who reestablishes that purpose and mission and provides him with this directive. So he's back on task. Here he goes. There's a lot of names in this particular chapter. We won't have time to go through and explain who every single character is. So we'll kind of skim over that. I would encourage you. I use this a lot. Chat GPT, if you tell it where you're at in the book and just ask it to explain to you who each character is in relation to the context, it will give you a short paragraph explaining what's going on. And it's extremely helpful. So if you're going through there and you all of a sudden get lost, and you're like, what in the world is he talking about? Who's Phoebe? Who is like, who are these people? Just go in and ask a search engine. It will compile that information for you and deliver it in a pretty concise manner that's extremely helpful. So here we have Diaphobe, who is Glaucus' daughter, the priestess of Phobos. Phobos is Apollo. So Apollo, Phobos, same character. Priestess of Apollo and Diana too. And so here we are. They show up. They slaughter the 7 bulls from the herd, as well as 7 yearling sheep. And so they're quick to do this. They're not wasting any time. And you have this dialogue that goes back and forth between the priestess and Aeneas. One of the interesting things there is that she doesn't, there's no preamble to any of this. It's just straight to the point. And in fact, she starts acting and actually kind of rebukes Aeneas in a way. It's like, why so slow? Like, why are you so slow to say your prayers, to begin this process? So he responds, Aeneas prays to Apollo there within the temple. And then you see the virgin actually transform in some sense into the Sibyl, because she's actually basically attacked by Apollo. Apollo takes hold of her, and then you have this transformation take place, and the journey begins. So she gives him a directive on how exactly this is going to work. You don't get to just show up and walk into the underworld, not without dying, anyways. And so one of those really, really good quotes from this is that she says, the Sibyl goes, born of the blood of the gods, Anchises' son, man of Troy, the descent to the underworld is easy. Night and day, the gates of shadowy death stand open wide. But to retrace your steps, to climb back to the upper air, there the struggle, there the labor lies. Only a few loved by impartial Jove are borne aloft to the sky by their own fiery virtue. Some sons of the god have made their way. And so she's like, it's real easy to die. Like, death is easy to come by. The return journey is the part that's difficult. And so she gives him the directive to go and find the golden bough, and to go find this golden branch of a tree that is in the near area. And that's what he must bring back as a gift to take with him into the underworld in order to gain passage across the river Styx and enter into the world of the undead, or the world of the dead, the underworld. So from this point, you actually have a bit of a distraction here. It seems like a distraction. But one of the great Trojan men who actually participated in the Trojan War, he used to be a companion of Hector's and is now a companion of Aeneas's, His name is Maecenas. Um, he is Aeolus' son, and he was a herald. So he had a trumpet, and he would blast the trumpet, and men would come to their aid. And so he was a friend of Hector's. Now he's a friend of Aeneas's. He actually dies during this portion of the story, and they have to go about his burial rites, bringing back up what Alex just alluded to. Like, they take this extremely seriously. And one of my favorite um, parts of this is that Aeneas is actually right there with them, cutting down trees and preparing the funeral pyre. He spurs his men in the forefront of their labors, geared with the same woodsman's tools around his waist. So he doesn't just like delegate this and act like, all right, yeah, well, we got to get this taken care of. You guys do this so we can get it over with. He actually joins them in the labor. He doesn't differentiate himself and act like he's too good for this process, which points to his virtue, but it also points to how serious the Trojans take this ritual. And so there's a couple things going on there. He actually joins them and leads from the front in this work. It just so happens that through his virtue and his ability to not take himself too seriously while taking things very seriously, he actually ends up finding the golden bough as he thinks to himself, like, this could be where it is. Like, it seems like we're in the right spot. At that point, 2 doves show up, which are the sign of his mother Venus. And he realizes this and then follows the doves to the golden bough, tears it, and goes back to the Sibyl's shrine. I find it very interesting that she tells him that if he's meant to go, that the bough will break free immediately with very little struggle. But when he finds it, Aeneas grips it at once. Though the bough holds back, he tears it off in his zeal. So just some interesting stuff there. I would be curious to hear what you guys really like think of that, because it almost is like a contradiction. Like, maybe he shouldn't be going into the underworld. The bow kind of holds back on him, but it's interesting. It doesn't come away super freely, but he is able to pull it off. And she also said that, like, if he was not able to move it, he wasn't meant to go. And so once again, you have him sort of in this competition of striving his will against the powers that are set against him, and he prevails. So takes the bow back, and they descend into the underworld. You get a pretty interesting walkthrough of them coming down, seeing the souls that are trying to cross the river Styx. Many of them, because they're not buried properly, cannot pass over. And so they end up in this tumultuous, just like crowd of people that are continually, their souls are trying to get into the underworld, and they can't pass because they have not received a proper burial yet. So once again, to Alex's point, a very big deal within Roman and Trojan culture. From there, there's a lot there. We're not going to go too deep into everything that he sees along the way to the Elysian Fields, but some very interesting stuff. You have these monsters that he encounters right when he first gets down there that are actually shades, and he doesn't realize, he thinks he's about to have to fight them all to the death, but it turns out that they're actually just spirits. But he doesn't realize that at first, and he draws his sword and is ready to fight all of the monsters of hell in order to get to his father. So just something to think about there. Like, the level of his resolve in this task is absolute. There's no questioning in his mind what he's there for and what he's going to do, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the barriers that are in his way. He's going forward. And so you'll notice that, like, those are a bunch of the monsters from many of the Greek myths that were in their own right the final boss in whatever story that they were happened to be in. He's ready to fight all of them at once in order to get to his father. So interesting point there. He goes down, and they work their way through the underworld, and I want to kind of pick up where he actually meets Anchises. We'll mention a few things. He actually meets Palinurus there in the throng of those that are trying to get across the river Styx, and because Palinurus has not received a proper burial, he can't get across. And Palinurus requests that Aeneas might go back in the journey in order to give him a proper burial. Tells how he died, tells how he's thrown overboard and how he swims for like 3 days and eventually gets to the shore, and then are killed by just roaming savages basically. Um, but his body is left just floating on the seashore, and then the Sibyl um, actually comforts him and goes, actually, like, you're going to receive a proper burial, and the place where you're buried will be named for you. Your legacy will live on. Don't despair. There will be a time of waiting for that to happen, but it will happen. So don't give in to despair there. So interesting part there. Um, once he gets across the river, he ends up running into Dido, and that part is pretty heart wrenching. Um, she is utterly dejected and furious, still in death, and he breaks down and is pretty emotional about the fact that he sees her again, and like the rumors have been confirmed as true. She is dead, and you can tell that this has a massive impact on him. Um, I'm curious what you guys would say, but it almost seems like he defers some responsibility here and abdicates a little bit in sort of his excuse making to her. It was never my intention. I never knew that it would cause you this much pain. It was never my choice to leave. It was all the gods. Like, fate bore me on. I had no choice in the matter. There's a whole lot of just like sidestepping the fact that, like, he he is the cause of her death, which of course is no comfort to her. She eventually just walks off without ever actually even acknowledging him. And so, an interesting thing there. He's back on mission. He clearly is resolved and set his face. He knows where he's going and what he must do, but still, he's a man. He's not. He isn't Christ. Like, he's not perfect. And anyways, I don't know if you had something there, Alex.
It's interesting that, you know, a couple pages before, you know, within the hour or so in the storyline here, he's drawing his sword and ready to fight, like, you know, like the entire collection of the scariest monsters in all of Greek and Roman mythology, without a second thought. This like massive display of heroism and courage, and then he sees Dido and he just completely kind of, you know, his tact changes completely, and he's like, "Ah, well, wasn't my fault. Sorry about that."
Yeah.
So, maybe Virgil's trying to get at something, maybe even to a degree, just the truth of the way that God made the universe. That, you know, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Like, maybe there's something to that. You know,
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's my only real thought. It's like, you know, you very clearly he's still Aeneas. He's very courageous, but like, you know, maybe this is worse than staring down the hounds of hell, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a very good warning for young men, married or unmarried, that like the power and the sway that you hold over, um, the women who love you is big and extremely important, and it's a scary thing. Um, it's something that should be weighed in the scales often. Am I loving this person well who's been given to me, first of all, if you're married, and also just sort of like the thought of entering into a marriage covenant, like, take this seriously. It's not a flippant thing. um in all reality, like, this is the greatest failure that we see in Aeneas's entire journey, that Virgil gives us, is the failure that he has with Dido. And even after the fact, like, he still hasn't come to grips with the fact that, like, it's his fault. Obviously the gods were involved there. There was a lot of manipulation going on, but regardless, like, he's responsible, and he's still having a hard time taking responsibility for this particular thing. And to your point, there's there's a lot of things in the world where you can like show a bunch of bravado and toughness and grit, until it's time to tell your wife the truth.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the spine starts getting a little sideways, and you become a coward very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
because her her disapproval and disappointment of you in you is more fearful for most men than facing literally all the demons of hell. And so keep that in mind. Like, courage is displayed in many ways, but being the kind of man that can actually lead your household is up there close to the top. Like like having the courage to admit your wrongs and repent of your sins, and like be able to tell your wife the truth, tell your children the truth. Those are the true marks of integrity, and like what a man really is. And so high charge, high responsibility, and carries a lot of weight. So um, yeah. All right. So um, moving on, um, you have him meet Deiphobus, who I think is a really interesting character. Um, right here, you have him right after you see Dido. He sees Deiphobus, who is one of Priam's sons. Really interesting here because they throw some very big shade at Helen in this particular section. If you're paying attention, Paris obviously steals um, Helen when she comes back after Paris is dead. Helen marries his younger brother, also Priam's son, Deiphobus. And the night of the sack of Troy, Deiphobus basically says that she's in this revel, stirring people up with Bacchus's rites. So in this way, sort of like this very sexually charged ritual, she's sort of leading it. But in reality, what she's doing is waving a torch on the city walls to let the Greeks know that the gates have been opened. And so he lays a heavy charge of treachery at her feet, um, rightly so, because he's asleep during all of this, and suddenly his bedchambers, thrown open, and she actually leads Menelaus, her previous husband, the Greek, right into his room after having stolen all of his weapons and left him defenseless. And so the Greeks actually maim him. His ears are cut off, his nostrils are slit, he's just mangled by the Greeks, and he's still very not happy about it. So interesting thing there. You always sort of like, especially in the movie, you sort of get like Helen is this very like love struck, innocent, she didn't do anything wrong character, and she's just like at the mercy of all of the whims of these men around her the whole time. Not how Virgil puts it. So worth noting. He plants the golden bough, and then is allowed to pass through the gates. And then he enters into sort of the more glorious side of the underworld. You have the ancient line of Teucer, noblest stock of all, those great-hearted, heroic sons born in better years, and they name some of them Ilus, Assaracus, and Dardanus. So those of Dardan blood include Aeneas. So one of the forebears of Aeneas is Dardanus, founder of Troy. And then you have some interesting stuff here. So he kind of he describes in some way like the Roman thought of virtue versus the Roman thought of sin. And so you have people who are being punished for very particular kinds of sins, and you see that treachery, civil war, those who made pacts and then didn't keep them. Those are people that are punished very heavily in the underworld. And then you have these virtues. Here are troops of men who had suffered wounds fighting to save their country, those who had been pure priests while still alive, the faithful poets whose songs were fit for Phobos or Apollo, those who enriched our lives with the newfound arts they forged, and those we remember well for the good they did mankind. And so you see once again, like, courage is, the height of virtue in the Trojan and Roman world and culture. These are the men that were rewarded in the afterlife. Then we meet Anchises again. He gets to the fields of Elysium. He's asking, where does Anchises dwell? To which I think his name's Maceus, but one of the great men who is there in the field basically says, like, we don't dwell anywhere in particular. We just live here in sort of like this communal type space. He marches on deep in the valley's green recesses to find Anchises, and Anchises greets him with this incredible greeting. You've come at last. Has the love of your father hoped for mastered the hardship of the journey? Which is another one of those quotes from this particular book. Like, did your devotion and love for me overcome all of the hardships and obstacles that you had to face to get here? And then he brings up Libya again, referring back to Dido, how I feared the realm of Libya might well do you harm. And Anchises was correct, and it was absolutely true. And then we move on to one of those, another just very heart-wrenching portions of this. Aeneas pleaded, his face streaming tears. 3 times he tried to fling his arms around his neck. 3 times he embraced nothing. The phantom sifting through his fingers, light as wind, quick as a dream in flight. This is exactly a picture of what happened when he was leaving the city of Troy and goes back to find his wife and meets her ghost. This is the exact phrasing that Virgil used there that he uses again here. And so you have this, like, the people in Aeneas's life that he loves the most are taken from him, and then he wants to be reunited with him but can't fully get there, which also sort of is another thing that continues to crush the Gnostic tendencies that we have. For some reason, this physical embrace was really important, and the fact that he couldn't fulfill it was crushing for him. He tries over and over again to embrace his father and his wife and can't make that connection. And for some reason, I don't know why, maybe that's just the way God made the world, it's crushing for him to be able to fully embrace them physically in these portions of the story. So just figured something we're always hounding on. I think that's another good spot of evidence for it. At this point, Aeneas is pretty shell-shocked by the beauty and just the grandeur of Elysium. And he asks about the river Lethe flowing behind where Anchises is. And then you get into a really, I think, the most interesting part of this chapter, which is this process that, as far as we can tell, Virgil just kind of like put into the story on his own. We don't have any really like solid historical context that the Romans believed in reincarnation, but Virgil puts it in right here in a really interesting way, in order to basically show Aeneas his descendants. And so you have Anchises go through this list of great men who will be great Roman city builders and lawgivers and warriors and kings, and describing them all to Aeneas. And I think this is extremely important because it gives Aeneas something to fight for. This is not just for you. It's not just for Ascanius. The first one in line is your last son. He's getting ready to enter the world. Like, look at the power of him. Look at the greatness that he holds. He will be a king among men, and he's getting ready to come into existence again. So just super, super interesting. Alex, I don't know if you had some particular ones that you wanted to hit on there. There's a lot, so we probably shouldn't try to do all of them, but there's a few there that are really, really interesting. I had a couple, but I figured I'd let you.
So from a historical perspective, there were several that were pretty interesting. Virgil did a good job knowing his audience, which was primarily Caesar Augustus. So when he's describing Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, like those guys get pretty glowing reviews, which makes sense. If you kind of put yourself in Virgil's shoes as best you can. Um, Spends a lot of time really sort of lauding the virtues of military commanders like Scipio and other guys like this that went to war with Rome's enemies. Scipio's noted because he had a big role to play with Carthage, which ties back in with Dido and the whole thing. So the historical aspect, I guess in general, those names I kind of mentioned specifically was very interesting. And then the quote that really kind of hit me hardest: "Hard on his heels will come Tullus, to shatter the leisure of his native land and to rouse to battle men that have settled into idleness and armies that have lost the habit of triumph."
Mm.
I think I texted that to you, Tate, and then I just said familiar mission. Like
Yeah.
that, if that's not what we're trying to do, I don't know what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's super important there too to remember the fact that the triumph was a particularly Roman thing. Triumph was a Roman invention, and so basically it was like the act of conquering and bringing the Pax Romana to the outside savages, but in a way of utter domination. The triumph was as a general coming back into the city of Rome, leading defeated soldiers behind him in chains and being lauded through the streets in a great parade of glory. And the splendor of it was to the point where they would have a Roman soldier stand on the chariot with a particular general, and every few minutes he would just remind him, "You're not a god. You're not a god. Remember, you're not a god," because the ceremony was so spectacular that they thought, like, they knew it was dangerous. Like, this guy, if we do this and then like this guy lets it get to his head, he's going to come back and just try to take over everything, which did happen numerous times. So just really interesting there to say that he comes to disrupt his country's peace, to rouse a stagnant people, armies stale to the taste of triumph, back to war again. And so I would agree. I think this is a pretty good definition of what we're trying to do, like rouse the armies of God. You actually have work to do. I know it seems really comfortable and nice here, but it's killing you. It actually is a disease that's rotting the foundation. And if we want Christendom to rise again, this is what must take place. A stagnant people must be roused. So yeah, an incredible quote. One of my favorites is just the very beginning when Anchises kind of bids him to come. So come, the glory that will follow the sons of Troy through time, your children born of Italian stock who wait for life, bright souls, future heirs of our name and our renown. I will reveal them all and tell you of your fate. Which is very interesting because he's talking about a bunch of people who will live long after Aeneas is dead. But this is Aeneas's fate. This is you. This is the mission that you are carrying currently. Here they all are. They're going to come from you, which means that this is your fate, not just theirs. You and them are one, in a sense. And so if we're going to talk about generational legacy, passing things down to our children's children, giving good inheritances, I think this is the kind of thing that we should be, drawing our eyes to. There's more than just wealth to be handed down. There's more than just property to be handed down. There is a legacy that is a good name. And so the legacy that these men are receiving from Aeneas is the fact that they belong to Aeneas. And then that is in turn ends up being the thing that they are most proud of. As Rome, they continue to put together the Lucis Troia that we talked about last week, who is named essentially the mock war dance that the young elite men do on horseback. And those units were called Trojans. And so everything is this harkening back to the fact that they actually come from Troy. They actually come from Aeneas, and they're honoring that legacy, this inheritance that's been passed down. Yeah, you've got a lot of guys here that are mentioned that are just, they're literally names that will never die. Pompey, the Caesars, Scipio. It's great. One of the things that Anchises really commands here is that they should never turn against each other in civil war, coming on the heels of Pompey and Caesar, and the fact that they fought one another. And so you had these great Trojan or these great Roman men who were bringing wars to bear against each other and having their armies fight one another for the throne. And my sons, never unnerve yourselves to civil war, and never turn your sturdy power against your country's heart. Just really, really good. I think if we're going to talk about like no more brother wars, no more infighting, this is exactly what Virgil is talking about here. Like, if you tear one another apart, you'll never succeed in the mission. Something to take home. How much time do we have? Not a lot. Okay. The one that I really wanted to bring up is Marcellus. And this is Virgil really doing what Alex was just talking about, where he knows his audience really well. And he is really weaving some things into the story here on purpose to cater to his audience. But really, really interesting. He actually is stopped by Aeneas, and Aeneas asks, "Who is that?" and points to a particular man. The man he points to is Marcus Claudius Marcellus. In the book, he's just referred to as Marcellus, and there's several Marcelluses. There's more than one even in this section, but in that period of time, there's several. This is the nephew and adopted son of Augustus Caesar. He is seen as this rising star in Rome's future, but he dies tragically young in 23 BCE, before fulfilling his potential. And so obviously Augustus Caesar is destroyed by this. It is this massive pain point for him, and Virgil weaves him into the story and essentially like displays this a massive amount of honor to him, and then also translates the fact that there's like this great mourning of the Roman people as a whole, because this young man died in his youth, and we didn't get to see the glory that he was capable of in life because he was taken early. And I just think that part is one of the more like more incredible examples of like masterful writing that I've seen in anything. The fact that you could like weave it into the story and read the story multiple times, and if you didn't have the historical context, have no idea that that's what he was doing. But for the people of his day, they knew exactly what he was talking about, and it be very overt, but also not at the same time. There's a massive amount of allusion, but he also is very directly addressing the subject.
Yeah, nobody that knows is able, like, it's very, very clear what he's talking about, but he does it so well that it's not ham-fisted in any way.
Right.
It's like he does. That's basically what this whole story is. you know, and you could do a lesser writer would just be like, well, this, like, I don't know, I guess the story kind of sucks, but like, I see what you're doing. But, you know, this was written for a very particular task, which, like, by all respects, probably should have been, um, timely and not timeless. But he wrote it so well that what was meant for this very particular people at this very particular time, we're still sitting here running our mouths about it and trying to understand.
I think that that's a extremely valid point, and it's true. I think this also just points to the fact that we are Westerners too.
Yeah, yeah,
Like the people that he's talking about are actually our people.
yeah.
we we trace back to Rome, and Rome traced itself back to Troy. And so the reason that this stirs things in us is that we can actually relate to it. Like we understand the virtues that he's speaking of, even though they were pagans and we're Christians. All of it makes perfect sense to us, where we very quickly draw the direct lines between the virtues and the sins. We can see very clearly the relationships between father and son, between ancestor and descendant. We just understand this. This is who we are, and the fact that we have gotten away from it and don't recognize those connections is actually an indictment on us.
Yeah.
We should inherently know that this is who we are. This is the founding work of the Western ethos. It should make sense to us that all of these things immediately draw connections in our minds, and all of these things immediately fire for us.
Yeah, there's we're largely rootless, but there's like, if Virgil were to be writing this from a different vantage point in history, like you could conceivably have Alfred in this, him being the next one of mentioned in this book. You could have, I don't know, go down the list.
Richard the Lionheart.
Richard the Lionheart, Cromwell, Washington. Yeah. Like, I just pick the guy. Like, we're still in a real way, like, attached to this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's extremely important to sort of recognize, is that, like, it's not just, yes, there's a universality to the story and to the virtues, and it's the kind of human story that is very obviously true in some sense, even though it's pagan. But more so than that, it's inherently Western, and because we are Western, it makes even more sense to us. There's a deepness and a truth to it that echoes for us in particular. And that's not a bad thing. Like, it's actually good. It's actually virtuous that we have these founding works that we can refer back to and go, oh, I can see myself in that. This is good. All right. So he walks him through all of his descendants. There's this great parade of glory, and we could go into a lot more detail there, but we are kind of running out of time. The last thing that I really want to hit on are the gates that he passes through to get back to the world of the living. So you have two gates of sleep. They are the gate of horn and then the gate of ivory. Very, very interesting. Some very medieval stuff going on here. One, they say, is called the gate of horn, and it offers easy passage to all true shades. Aeneas is not a shade. Aeneas is a living man, which has been part of his, obstacle in getting to the underworld and surviving all of the things that he's faced so far, is the fact that he's actually not dead. The other glistens with ivory, radiant, flawless, but through it, the dead send false dreams up toward the sky. Very interesting. So in some sense, you could look at this and go, the visions, for instance, some of the visions that Aeneas has seen probably came through the gate of ivory to meet him. There were things that were sent, but not everything that he's seen and heard has been correct. there have been some that have been false. And so you can see where these like false dreams come up towards the sky, and are sent by the dead through the gate of ivory. What's very interesting about this is that this is the gate that Aeneas goes through. Aeneas goes through the gate of ivory and cuts his way to the ships that are waiting there in Hesperia. I think the most interesting thing about this is that, in some sense, when Aeneas gets back to the upper world, and it's not explicit, but you'll see some hints at it later on in the book, is the fact that Aeneas does not remember his journey. It almost is as if it's a false dream that he had. It's a vision that he endured, but he never actually left the temple of the Sibyl. He didn't ever actually descend into the underworld. And so from his perspective, he's just seen all of these things and had this massive reset. So things went tragically bad in Libya. Dido commits suicide. Things don't necessarily get a whole lot better from there. They go back and they celebrate his father's funeral. But even that is this like time of mourning and sadness in many ways. Then you have the goddess come down and light the ships on fire, and he has to cut out a large portion of his people and leave them with their relatives in a distant land. And so it's not like all of a sudden we've moved to triumph. I think Alex is correct in that, like, we see that the heading is set and we know where he's going and he's going to get there. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But things haven't necessarily gotten like easy all of a sudden. Things are still very difficult. He has to go to the underworld and literally cross the river Styx. It's a daunting task. And then he gets back to the surface and doesn't remember any of it. It's almost as if he carries the weight of it in his soul without mentally being able to remember all the details. And you'll see that in a couple examples coming up later. His mother Venus has Vulcan, the ironsmith god, forge him a shield with his descendants displayed on it, their acts and deeds of those that will come after him. And Aeneas sees it and is delighted by it, and it looks familiar to him, but he doesn't know who they are, even though we just saw that Anchises literally named them and what they would do and who they would be. So something to kind of think about there as we're going into the next book. I'm going to stop this recording just in case guys have some questions, and then we can kind of get into some discussion. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to these. Hopefully they're interesting and helpful. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one.